The United States federal government should substantially strengthen collective bargaining rights for correctional population workers in the United States. The contention is prison labor. The law systematically denies incarcerated workers humanity through failure to recognize collective bargaining rights. Prisoners are stripped of workplace protections and rendered disposable. Arbitrary when incarcerated workers do not have rights to organized position strike rights. Subsidies to these regulations, employee constitution, it's not only to hold out conversion prisons, one not required by one course, not directly addressed whether employees are likely to job position, including incarcerated people. That results in hyper exploitation. The false imposition of a divide between free market and undignified prison labor is grounded in a white racial sexual animus that renders incarcerated people disposable and expendable as that's 23. Carceral labor continue about labor provides a different between us and the economic direction of carceral labor production, the impoverishing house work, generally responsibility, exploiting incarcerated people, provides weapon against free labor, substitute carceral protection and lower wages, according to the conclusion, have to recognize incarcerated workers, substance workers, and safely solidarity, the incarceration, self-workers, what's between workers, they will racialized, hard between faces and incarcerated, the capacity workers, white male, electrical, free shoes, and shots of commodity, economy, separate from the business, housework, according to exclude the incarcerated down, the separate world, and relation to the person, below logical, like not hearing and consciousness, true employer employee relations, structured by money for exchange. That extends to community service workers, extending carcerality beyond prison walls, creating systems of debt, peonage, that's 23 carceral labor can be reached with minor offenses and misdemeanors, tickets, constitutional license, constitutional approval of people, the course office, code of banking, creating the ability to criminalization of property, intersection, and debtor, system, the commission of heritage, the regional institutional, jurisdiction, substitute community service, for criminal legal data, LA stand on 1,000 community service, and more than $8 million over Canada, the first over the United States, use part of incarcerated people. Minimum wage rights to organize compensation of worker valid labor arrangement, otherwise illegal. It also spills over to broader collective organizing. Canon 23 in Jones versus North Carolina, Justice and Constitution, Health Department, Labor Center, which not collective labor self government, limited constitutional rights for permanent organizing activity, all 50 Jones enacting some regulations. The plan removes Jones versus North Carolina prisoners labor union and redefines correctional population workers as employees. That creates durable prison unions and spills up to minimum wage and benefit protections. Pick 19. Incarcerated workers case not directly adjust whether they're sexually employees and or because work release and property including the bargaining results and incompatible sexually employees or also confess protection of the employment laws court concluding legal status of employees incompatible legal status of percent of the BIE offers sexually employed women such matters the person in the is not based for the crime the rights of person in the benefits of the cultural nature of the constitution of the wage of the at race essentially hard the characteristics of employment relations that makes the unions of circumstances and improvement in addition to the unions were that from legal regulation and rights of the incarcerated should not be exempt from the normal legal provisions, regular and legal branch for relation of the movement, stuff with the stamp extensions, the wholesale canal bargaining rights, is the efforts to fight incarcerated workers as non-employees. Collective bargaining rights specifically are key. First is for autonomy. Unions create dignity by offering worker choice. Rector 24. Unions important because they secure dignity, protecting incarcerated people from dangerous and reading working conditions, 64% of their safety, even when not dangerous, and dehumanizing laws allowed to assert particular beliefs as opposed to being incarceration, cruel, mutual, and denies necessity, and means secret necessity, violence, 14th, no one denies autonomy, but secret control of their own terms, unions address in ways in which the imprisonment endangers dignity and autonomy. They supplant the internalization of retribution with solidarity. Rector 24. Prisoners for division that is situated within society, race building, dehumanizing, constant, classified, and divisive activity against the enemy, the long solidarity, disruptive, system, and others, and shared obligation, spirit of community against activities, by the corrupt, and fighting for both prisoners, to understand why the own identity, disrupting individuals, and pursuing respect, carceral discipline, provided social belonging, for dignity. Second is prison labor union linkages. Prison organizing is occurring on a small scale now, but lacks labor support. Legal recognition is key. Bayhan and Mayock 24. Although in prison movement, few again liberal support in the 70s, what unique conflict unionization nationally exclusive with conservation of fundamental living, policy, and consistent responsibilities for movement support prisoners over protective of the middle class, solidarity, making control of research to workers both rather than refuse recognition by whatever union movement, fear of personal labor, lowering wages, courts refuse to recognize the person unions remain obscure, unsupported. Coordinated linkages are key to break the cycle of recriminalization. Labor support beyond prison walls fights back against the scarlet letter of incarceration at National Employment Law Project 16. Each jurisdiction has been released for persons between 16 and 75% of employment a year after release when I went from all non-working men, criminal records, one-time work off, and below wage occupation, the employment relevant jobs, and favors, and benefits, union job offer, some security methods, distributed from wrong way for say, fairly good jobs, we can get a union, nice job, we screen with 14% from money, percent to unions, both APR for the only inclusive 8% higher percentage of best one by trade unions, but they're able to find nutrition for the labor unions, probably with such a table of the replicate the national service for call. Intermediates. Third is for improving prison conditions, South 22. I want personal list from WWE and NLRB union under the personal unions recognized by the NLRB that asking for people for suspension of the cause of the union make conditions licenses for the asking for nationwide dollars strike USA the limited construction of these contracts for the real estate videos USC and investigating policies against Alabama alleging conditions of the constitutional strikes achieve just incarcerated and high quality partners may push rights up to advance incarcerated individuals approve the measures to prevent this made from the legal basis which new challenges that prison labor will not immediately affect conditional and to make incarceration backlash for damage and make sure we will take massive movement and outside the case with knowledge public and defend vehicles episode campaigns. Collective action is empirically effective. Organizing is a small scale now but greater support galvanizes canon 23. Collective action by incarcerated people can bring changes or checks along the street. They could see the country united in the 20th century. The publicity of labor tradition, corruption for the governments and violence, labor law enforcement, but prison officials have the control of the narrative, creating a sort of violent prison organization. Lower city social media understand that that's in color the department changes and alter feed the element moving across the whole city and possible with the maximum security of their secret down and over the reforming in memory agreements for the committees advisors can be improved with support from the outside organizers prison like conditions or organizations are still in infancy. The 1AC centers prisoner resistance as a form of peer-to-peer politics that unsettles carceral hegemony and actively creates a world's capital be active from the perspective of the case as a political and spectrum benefits and discourses around the peer-to-peer politics by another organizations well in hegemony by transfer to workers of institutions over the formal implementation of social relation not also tradition global and second carrying the process and providing the reason of separation of separation of relation and like shares over the transformation with the carceral geography that is established bringing both means and for cultural liberation you find like ideas of the council world of times not this acting as there's not if you just say go over the body gets social carceral logic that generates through social promoters as the command by another as a incarcerated part of the reciprocal identification of establish be like unable to yourself with huge regulations significant intervention and social death. The right to bargain, mold solidarity along the labor frame and would empower abolitionism. Watch 2017 work by IWA context such as ABT that brings support to the union as a course of symbolization of the regulation which separate abolition unions get trust in unity privatization of the system command for reach breakdown system that for SR unions and liberation causing capitalism never be take from the telling union that advocates for the clean water coalition that community self-defense and chance and liberty to be relevant in the black board workers starting from the ideal is counterproductive to effective discussions for change for our community useful to is interested in need to change for some. I'm encouraged we would the stronger put this in abolition often ring by dreams the cycle of imagination and there's no these other legislators being counterproductive to abolition activist goals over sort of education declaration or Roberts at far side from that reality on the ground mass people and problems within our problems that unrealized realization for problems that they feel to not correctly used as advanced by a current policing by emphasizing imaginative aspect of the project and underpinning the same matter to achieve the ideal the evolution of knowledge of practical solutions that fix a broken system. The law can be a conduit for channeling resistance and achieving material gains for activists on the ground. For decades, legal scholars recognize also to give the idea of the law system towards the creation of the opportunity to steering the fine judgment of the potential the level of subdivision of the representation when they collaborate with the movement without control the gathering population and the bills will collect by the most directly impacted the chiefs as mentioned the language of lawyers preventing the system that organized with the late 19th and early 20th century representing workers lobbying developing for coalitions and particularly union for I think working struggles the machine workers about rights of the coalition give W lawyers access what can legal strategies do to build the power of this movement after Decades battles against the won the right to organize and check dramatically improve the farm workers in California tactics of movement lawyering. Lawyers can be employed in a carceral context. This approach is especially necessary in developing now in the carceral context. Hand-to-hand attorneys can serve as Washington and assume probably the easiest. Important for last side presented information as president to be no concept of the discipline of certain filing press means presents ethical disorder and impact policy and communication with incarcerated class of the right force being the recognition violation of the human rights organization engagement probably from the presenters and group centers with building international center where legal strategy capacity incarcerated emphasis on not winning quick building power organizing from them talk about reunification with the shelter how to navigate discussion with water and measure for safety one of the ways on their ship privacy and human has equal design installation hoping they will be the movement lawyers assist incarcerated and forming organizations. Prison labor unions are good. House and Rashid 23. Cause of abolition personal labor, ignore the battles prisoners how to ensure access to work and wages if you want to address it. We have to change society and racial prisons how change comes to organized working class, the correctional system for allowing labor systems and outside the percentage that goes to work without legal protection and for low payments and name of exclusion are just a more legal grounds prisoners deserve right to unionize. Okay. Unionize.
Good for context?
Yeah.
Okay. What makes incarcerated workers disposable, and how does the plan remedy that disposability?
Currently, the idea that incarcerated workers exist in a category outside workers because they are incarcerated and treating them as such is one that makes them disposable. The plan solves by giving them the right to bargain and considering them workers.
So the resolution to disposability is to be considered a worker.
What? Well, it's beyond that. Like the effects of
Oh.
disposability are also caused by the conditions imposed by
Yeah, the reason
prison
they're not considered
administrators.
workers now is because of certain norms, which
Okay.
in this instance give them the right to
The 1AC quote, starting from the ideal is counterproductive to effective discussions for change. What is the ideal?
I don't think the 1AC has like identified one ideal. I think the prior evidence is talking in the context of an ideal of abolition, and it says that starting from that point is one that fails because we need to consider the existing barriers to achieve that idealization.
Okay, what barriers are those?
What barriers are those? Let's see.
how
Police,
powerful prisons are,
yeah,
police,
yeah.
industrial complex.
Police, prison industrial
I mean,
complex.
the prior
Okay, that all sounds like huge barriers. How do we actually overcome those?
Well, the plan doesn't directly lead to abolition. That's not our argument.
So, okay,
It-
but what if
It
we
gives
were
prisoners
going
a
to-
survival strategy so they can forward abolitionism. They're being cracked down upon now. They're being
But
thrown into
how
solitary
does
confinement.
that okay, so
So-
prisoners.
so the way-
so prisoners.
fair enough.
So
So the
prisoners
way-
can start from the ideal, but
Huh?
not. So prisoners can start from the ideal.
Well,
No,
that's
they-
not
they
fair.
can.
No.
At what point can we start from the ideal, and how do we know what the ideal is?
I'm sorry, like,
I don't.
I don't
Yeah.
even understand the question. I feel like we're speaking in such abstractions that this is not even helpful.
That is the point that I'm making about your piece of 1AC evidence. The 1AC
Well,
National
that's the
Employment-
critique our
okay,
piece of
1AC
evidence
National
supports.
Employment Law Project 16, struck men and women bracketed with people. It's not in the plain text, it's not even in a highlighted piece of evidence.
I'm
Why
sorry,
would you do this?
can you repeat that?
Yeah, you struck through the phrase men and women and you bracketed in people. Wow.
To be more inclusive.
Okay, so, okay,
I
and
don't
how
see
did
why it's a
you,
bad thing.
how did you know and how were you able to predict that even if it wasn't in the plain text?
Well, we think,
I don't know
why
the
would
plain
it be?
text part.
Yeah.
Oh,
What's
what's
the
wrong
problem
with
with
that?
So you have looked at all your research and not just the plain text. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Maybe not all
correctional-
our research.
Correctional
but
population
others.
workers are not
Like,
classified as employees. Is that true?
What?
Correctional population workers not classified
They
as employees.
sometimes are, it's inconsistent.
Okay, so how does the act reclassify workers as employees?
By giving them collective bargaining rights, they're now considered workers.
Okay, so you give them collective bargaining rights and then that retroactively considers them workers.
Yeah, because it overturns the precedent that says they're not
Oh.
considered.
Okay, solvency relies on overturning precedent. Okay.
What is it said? Order is
Tuesday.
okay.
Gotcha.
Okay,
Can I borrow your stand?
Yeah, of course.
great. Can you speak to me at my computer?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Okay, take your computer. There we go. That was scary. Okay.
There's an R1 header at the top that's just left over. So ignore that. Have you told me my time response?
Yeah.
Alright, does everyone have that?
Give me one sec, I just got it, I touched that one bit. Okay, I'm good, Anish.
Demands for collective bargaining reform are structured around an infrastructural violence, the unquestioned value of productivity, and the disavowal dependency is an ableist commitment which guarantees the capacitation of the heroic citizen worker who can pull themselves up by the bootstraps and the debilitation of those who do not. Kim 25. Infrastructural violence, both organized abandonment, administrative violence, and ability. Mobilize the U.S. welfare state, manufacturing, neglect, motorization, preferentism system. Infrastructural violence describes the intent enablement through reform which fortify white supremacy, heteropatriarchal nuclear family, and class certification. These link racialized disablement to simultaneous creation of white enablement through exploitative workfare regimes, and wear away at disabled survival, disabling low income and racialized people in mass. This fortifies racial class hierarchies, aggressive domestic and global scales, unevenly distributed with ostensibly anti-establishment products inspired with normative investments of state and capital, fundamentally shaped by ableist ideas around dependency which define work as ways that reproduce devaluation of disability, emphasizing the ideological and narrative elements of infrastructural violence, figures of the welfare queen, non-citizen, migrant, disabled, non-worker, ideological narratives became a discursive strategy to privatize care. Some depends on the disregard care work of women. Quote-unquote is a functioning political movement and academic institutions. The dominant recourse to dependency as a rhetorical instrument justify racialized deaths and disablement following the abolition of legal racial discrimination. Disability present is even in the absence of a straightforward representation. Within history's labor, less identity, more a framework for infrastructural violence. Disability is a lens for making sense of and engaging in the able-bodied assumptions organizing the world that disable some while enabling others. Assessment, surveillance, punishment, control, organization, and abandonment. It's possible to understand U.S. infrastructure without understanding disability. Normative ideologies around dependency, labor, and production undergird resource austerity. Within the structure of competitive markets, inclusion and disability seeks the normalization to render disabled non-workers productive again. Williams 19. In a capital competition forms of production of surplus values, those unable to normalize, realize, or reduce wage and the devaluing power strategy, challenge devaluing, seeks normalization, disabled body, money aligned, more closely with the able as ideal worker, does will try to the underlying logic to produce oppression and withdraw the concept of inclusion for the form and function of markets in the first place. Despite representation of disabled workers, collective bargaining is one-size-fits-all. Stigmatization disincentivizes workers from identifying as disabled. Jews cannot represent people who cannot be members even if they would like to be. Thus precludes collective bargaining abilities and fine rationality. Instructs and populates activities. This creates a deadline for disabled workers facing increased barriers to market participation, less likely to enjoy the protections that derive from labor. Markets rely on eugenics to enforce the wage. Under the guise of rehabilitation, those who cannot meet the productivity standards of the average worker are subject to mass incarceration and asylums and forced sterilization. Rosenthal 21. Eugenics carried out against disabled people and people of color and women demonstrates the insidious ways elimination policies remain persistent. Disabled people represented in troublesome sources of counter-profitability. As the Fed defines it, to be disabled is to be unable to engage in a paying job. Systematically devaluing disabled people represented economic problem, necessitating a political solution. The failing solution was mass institutionalization, sterilization, and social elimination, codified, executed, and rendered illicit. Incarceration in asylums and prisons behind the pretense of being rehabilitated. Restrictions favor the social removal and warehousing. Illicit growth of standardized, competitive, time-regulated norms, labor bodies, and minds that are less profitably conformed with liabilities. Ideological conversion sends a message to all those who do not conform to the institutional wage, those who fail. Welfare must remain below the lowest wage rate, as the deserving separate from the undeserving, and those able to labor can be coerced into it. Impediment from the standpoint of capitalist and political economy, disabled people become target of incarceration and sterilization. The particular history of white supremacy, settler colonist expansionism, and racialized slavery, this disproportionately compromises black people, migrants, indigenous people. Vote negative, refuse to build a vision for labor politics on a violent infrastructure of productivism that disavows the dependency. Zabistanos 19. It's hard work to be disabled if you've been barred from work or behind bars and working, resisting work, working resistance. Disability and labor are separate, while we're being told they are. What is separating the mesh from mess into neat categories is the seam of work is a disavowed dependency. I'm less interested in reciprocal give and take than give and give, or take and take. The moment you enter a process of exchange or surrounded by the excess single disability, we see work beyond the production of value by labor, disfiguring consensus-based reality. What gives as waste is being given away, that impossible dream of life when all the space-time seem extra. Disability can't be in terms of violence and capital. We need to draw a circle around two cats and make right space claims buttable. Disability is the privilege which to form this capacity to deform categories, and so we ask, how can we live? Think about gambling and probabilities, thresholds, and doors of blind is the force bets. The player can't decline to play no matter what. A double blind is an apparent but false choice. The superability and is a double blind, is a or is a blind. The double blind describes the stakes of dependency, something you are bound to do that you still play out anyway. Deforming, dissolving boundaries, and still being bound. We're in impact during the occurrence of this debate. The call for the spectral deliberation requires structural epistemic gaslighting that denies disabled peoples embodied knowledge of how markets and labor movements actually feel. Paul House Jr. 20. Collective epistemic resistance characterized as antithetical discussion. Disengagement may be necessary and reasonable to mitigate structural epistemic gaslighting. Calls to re-engage deplatform. It is unwise simply to assert that feminists ought always to engage. It is unwise to understand all disengagements as the same. Refusing to engage can be a call towards a different conversation. When it appears to be disengagement from one perspective might be animating new or different forms of engagement from another. Epistemic institutions and practice structures knows differently. Some will enable others hindered due to assumptions and institutions that work against the interests of particular knowers. Intention is not the deciding factor in epistemic gaslighting, oriented but of circulation, particularly of understanding the world. There is no stop noticing or testifying to something, to cast doubt, to disengage and call upon others to disengage, contested epistemically, collectively, the given dominantly situated. And T. Collective bargaining rights are the rights to negotiate with employers. They do not include other labor rights. Until 12. Violations of foreign joint or assisted union do not implicate collective bargaining. We have distinguished the limited collective bargaining labor movements. Probably we differentiate the right to negotiate or administer agreements, the right to form or assist labor organization with penalty or price. Collective bargaining process and negotiation be nonsensical to read engage in collective bargaining as engage in labor rights. They violate the plan changes the FRA definition of employee, which modifies the class group rather than change the process of negotiation. This means the plan also affects OSHA, minimum wage, and other regulatory agencies, none of which are collective bargaining rights. That destroys clash and debatability since it kills women's ground by enabling anything that benefits labor as a plan mandate, killing decades of bargaining and unlimiting the topic. Topicality is a constitutive apt burden. Bracket every other part of the plan and see if it meets every word on the resolution. If not, vote negative because they haven't met their constitutive burden. That means the extra topicality is equivalent to untopicality. Case. Our interpreter, the AF gets to fiat the plan, the deck can not say it gets rolled back, but it can make arguments about enforcement. Under this interp, they get to fiat the plan, not any implication about overturning the 13th exemption or other far-reaching claims. Standards. A. Real world. Anything else idealizes it, which crushes exportation. B. Trump. All it assumes him, he uses loopholes in text of law. C. 2AC frameworks. They'll say plain text focus is important. Any other interpret normal means is a double burn. The plan will get circumvented by courts. Laundry with the message. 1. Narrowing. The courts will just narrow the scope of decisions they don't like with short circuits or a straight internal link. Read 16. Narrowly construes the scope of higher court precedent in ways that is more limited. Narrowly construes the higher court precedent not to apply to pose substantial challenge to the Supreme Court's authority. The court's decision to issue unclear precedent can be understood as a kind of delegation to lower courts. Narrowing from below is fairly easy to find. DC v. Howard struck down a law banning handguns. Lower courts quickly tamed power and curtailed its implications. 2. Declaring dicta. Courts can determine the aspects of the ruling as the app establishes were unnecessary for reaching the conclusion of the case to avoid following them as precedent. Holbrook 20. Statements that fall outside what was necessary to decide the issue or deemed as dicta not being considered by any precedent. Remarks incidental to the dispositions in the case are not considered precedent. Definitions leave room for interpretation. One way is holding, maybe another way is dictum. A reasonable mind can disagree about what constitutes dictum versus holding, even on the appellate bench. 3. Distinguishing. Courts can just avoid applying precedent set by the AF by distinguishing future cases from the one the AF applied to based on different facts. Mentionality 21. The purpose is to explain why precedent is incapable. If a case does not support the FMU, one to distinguish precedent whether a past decision is applicable to the current case depends on several factors such as jurisdiction facts as a case and whether the case remains good law. 4. Overturning ignoring. Nothing stops lower courts, the Supreme Court, from just deciding later cases differently to curtail the precedent established by the AF. Lower courts can also just ignore precedent they don't like. E.g. state courts in the South didn't order desegregation until the 70s. And alchemizing the organic struggles of incarcerated people into a degree handed down by fiat empties the radical potential of the demand. Selective incorporation of testimonies of the incarcerated means the inevitable one-error pivot to listening to the oppressed is counterinsurgency. Angor and Angor 21. What makes non-reformed reform an individual man should be seen as one step toward something. Reform to serve to educate and unite people, connect a wider vision of change. The demand is one as important as the demand itself. A raise extractors to strike is very different from increase handed down by an employer, and reform may be emptied of its revolutionary significance if merely introduced by fiat. What is at stake is not short-term material gain, but the ability to win more in the future. Prisons are not rule-based institutions. The experience of incarcerated people is not determined by top-down policy, but by the relation of domination intrinsic to prisons. The AF theory of change is wrong and makes debating it a complete waste of time. Kemp and Chomtek 23. This focus on establishing proven rules fails to bolster the power of prison. The conceptualization of prison will define consolidated state power. Advocates conceptualize prison as rule-bound institutions. This allows prison to be seen as core elements of democracy. The extended human rights regime in prisons can lead to increased funding of vast bureaucracy, renewed legitimacy of fear of large compensation led to Scottish prison service being granted £500 million, which would enable an increase in prison population. Mark out population. Solidarity. The solidarity turn. IWW prison chapters demand supporters work to abolish prisons, release all prisoners, and repeal the 13th Amendment. The AF does the opposite by securing and reforming prisons. 1AC South Hall 22. Organizers are calling upon supporters to lift up their 4 demands. 1. Repeal the 13th Amendment's slavery exception. 2. Closure jails and prisons. 3. All private prisons. 4. Release all political prisoners. Turns case. 13 makes CBR impossible. 1AC South Hall 22. Incarcerated workers not have collective bargaining rights because the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. Due to this caveat, more than 900,000 inmates work full-time in American prisons for no compensation. Cool. That's not good. Yeah. Good.
Yep. Okay. Want to ask about the first piece of Kim evidence. The card seems to set the bar at solving, quote, organized and administrative abandonment. How does the alternative do that?
Mm-hmm. Kim is a theory of power card, understanding that disability is not an individual subject position, it is a structure. In other words, it enables some and disables others.
I agree, but
Yeah.
the card says that is materialized and instantiated
So,
through,
hang on,
quote,
hang on.
administrative and organized abandonment.
The-
What systems of administrative structures does the alt put in place to prevent
the-
workers from getting
The
harassed?
premise of your question is wrong. The premise of your question says, well, alts have to solve their theories of power, which is not how debate works. We have presented a theory of the way that the world works, and we have said, given that way that the world works, a better alternative to the 1AC is to refuse to build world on the on the valorization of labor.
Okay, then I want to.
That is like saying, like, I don't know, like that's like being the alt, like that's like saying, like, I don't know, like the alt to like
Okay, I think that's
trans theory
important
has to
for
end
you all to
all
remember
trans-
when impact claims are made premised upon this theory of power, because the alternative needs an internal link
The
to solve this.
distinction is that
That's completely
we
fair.
have
No,
made a
that's-
K of the aft
That's great.
deliberation
That's great.
in this space, and the alternative is an alternative to deliberation of the 1AC.
Right. I want to
Yes,
ask
theory of
about.
power, bad things out there.
Right. I
Oh,
want to
yeah,
ask
that's
about
cool.
Zabatsanos.
Yep.
Yeah. What is like what is the alternative vision that is not based on labor politics
The alternative is an alternative to deliberation over the plan. We will defend that refusal is always a prior question to the generation of those alternatives.
What does that do to, how does that, I'm sorry.
We have
I'm sorry.
made a critique of the legacy's presentation as an attempt to mobilize the debate space towards the modes of
What does refusal
hyperproductivism
do
we
for
critique.
prisoners who are
This-
forced to work
Okay,
under bad
again,
work
and you're
conditions?
pressing scales, because the question gets flipped
Mhm.
back onto you.
Okay.
What does reading the app in this round do for those prisoners? We will make arguments that it does jack shit, but what it does do is rehabilitate the debate space towards modes of hyperproductivism we have critiqued. The alternative is a
Why is that
refusal of
good?
that
Why
injunction.
is a singular focus on this debate round and our ability within this debate round good? Why is that desirable?
Well,
Because
hang on,
it's
haven't you said starting with idealization is bad?
What?
You were like starting with the ideal and trying to like fiat a bunch of things is like evil and bad, so we shouldn't do it.
oh yeah, if idealization
But
is critiquable,
That's
then
very
it's
different
certainly
because
true.
we have not made the claim
I
that the plan.
tried to help you
reading of the
distinguish
plan-
one easy cross-sex and you were no help to yourself at all.
Well, but I'm asking more so about your alternative.
We're gonna win a
We have not.
like
Mhm, go ahead.
sequencing claim, just like super simple premise. For a conversation to look outward to be good, we need to know whether or not
I
we're
understand
having the right
rejection is a
conversation.
prerequisite to
Correct.
alternative political horizons. How do we know those alternative political horizons are desirable? Why aren't those like
Because
works?
they're
Why
not
aren't those
based-
They
conservative?
start from premises that are not based in productivism, which we have identified as eugenics.
I don't understand. So, like, any critique of productivism is inherently one that is progressive? What about, is
I don't
that
know what
true?
you're
What about, like, right-wing populist narratives now?
What are you talking about? Productions that don't start from ableism are good. Yeah.
Ten?
Yeah. You can say that stuff.
Here, sheet of paper. If that's what you're doing.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah, would you do that? Seven?
7.
Actually, sorry, I'm pasting stuff, so I'll just restart it. Yeah, 7. Okay, 6:45. Pass me this. Thank you. Well, everyone's waiting for the doc. It's case, topicality, critique. No, everyone gets it.
One second, I received it, but I have not clicked on it.
Everyone good? Giving prisoners the right to collectively bargain is key to solving 2 impacts. 1, prison labor hyper-exploitation. A lack of wage protections dehumanizes in prison populations and render them disposable through the social reproduction of the white free worker. That's Acton Armstrong. 2nd is debt peonage. Expendable labor traps the formerly incarcerated and community service workers in cycles of poverty criminalization that extend carcerality beyond the prison walls. That's Act and Archibald. Durable fiat includes implementation, but also enforcement. Circumvention should not be a core to an R under this topic. Anything else nukes education because Trump is in office and makes the app auto L. Even if the real world is relevant, I'll answer each of the standards. First, real world. Even if the real world is relevant, you should still have some concern for side parity. To be Trump standard, we've straight turned it. It means that their vision of durable fiat is worse for education. C, true C framework is not a double turn. Durable fiat is part of durable fiat is fiating the plan. Durable fiat entirely brackets out the court's turn. These cards are a double turn with their interpretation because these basically amount to the plan will be rolled back, which we both agree is a total non-starter. But no narrowing. Lower courts are bound by the plan. Legal clarity 25. Legal landscape of the U.S. relies on consistent application of laws. Circus was highlighting consistent courts resolve these conflicts and sharing federal laws of power. Reply to formally absent a ruling of each interpret statutes independently lack of formally encourage just foreign trap the mechanism resolving circus resolve the court the final arbiter of the federal law. Once court issues a ruling that a decision by establishes a binding precedent eliminates existing conflict by building authoritative interpretation of constitutional prevention. Dicta is not relevant. We are overturning a Supreme Court precedent, which is the definition of not being dicta. No distinguishing R1 is the evidence as Jones was the basis for was the basis for all prison labor laws. No overturning or ignoring that's rollback of the plan, but Supreme Court precedent solves, which was above the Angler and Angler card refused Ivory Tower. Theorizing reformism, the plan is casualty management. Rodriguez and 20 of abolitionist practice about collective accountability doing work to challenge involuntary hysterectomies, a detention center doing abolition friendly work because opposed racist site violence. If somebody proposed that in a debate, citing evidence from your book would be like reformism pushed them towards a Republican-based striker demands reform demand outward, and actually a survival and casualty management demand to save off imminent death and heal more capitalized on reforms forwards. Reforms in the militant ideological position very different than casualty management. The camp doesn't answer the plan. The plan is not responsive to the plan. The plan is not human rights in prison. That's far more in line with the alternative. They've dropped every one piece of evidence that's internal link that says collective bargaining rights specifically are solvent, including the South Pole evidence. No professionalization turn. That's the status quo. Prisoners are forced to work and do fucked up manual labor. The plan gives them autonomy over what work they want to do. No particularism turn. Zats is our card and is describing the carceral labor continuum, which the AF disrupts by breaking down the divide, the symbolic divide between the free labor and undignified prison labor turn. Undignified prison labor, no solidarity turn. It's totally zero. Yes, prisoners have several demands, but one of those is collective bargaining rights. And we read internal links that those spill up to other things, and it is not these current issues are not solely our current prison work is not based in the 13th Amendment, but rather Jones. T. We meet. The plan does not fiat minimum wage protections, but solely collective bargaining rights that legally scales up to wage protections. That's the thing. Evidence Centel does not establish a violation. All the plan does is give prisoners the right to unionize. Only part about wages says we meet. Insert rehighlighting of 1 and C Centel below USC in yellow. Regardless if it correctly clarifies the scope of the plan, apply text in vacuum. Anything else is arbitrary. Kind of interpretation. Collective bargaining includes all terms of employment. ILO 11. Collective bargaining means all negotiated between employers and workers for work conditions terms. Relations cover wages, benefits, time, slashing coverage, facilities beyond what is provided for legislation. Excluded particulations from scope incompatible with the right to collective bargaining preferred. AF ground federal benefits and protections are the only way to generate deficits to states. beats circumvention. Their topic nukes the app B, over-limiting, only allowing NLB apps to produce a stale and slight weight and excludes core literature controversies which discuss wage protection for currently excluded groups. See no offense, every core functional limit, including econ and rights groups. Still links, lack of solvency, advocates, check, all else, D, reasonability, competing interests, cause a race to the bottom of that, crowds out substance, critique. That's messed up. Framework, with the implementation of the plan against links and a competitive alternative. With the implementation of the plan against links and a competitive alternative, evaluates on comparative solvency, solves AFGAN, which is key to fairness and clash, which outweigh individual wrongs, reject floating picks, they moot the entire 1EC, ruining education fairness, and are double termed with all their links. The 1EC is imaginary, Islam, the alternative, it centers prison resistance as a form of prefigured world maker, which disrupts carceral hegemony, as Cabo Bianco, for that, an ethic of repair over one of the ideal, anything else only cements carceral hegemony through failing to tie visions for change, for advancing conditions in the here and now. That's Fryer. Ethic of repair is good. Fryer 23. I do not think idealizations and analysis to provide to solve framework practice agenda inherent problems need to be resolved. A program has tier desirable goals, fear, but instead of feasibility model based on repair. The goals here is to repair aside and not just the police, focus on limiting oppression, establishing institutions that allows us to be treated as equal under the law, more theoretically sound, politically effective. One, activist groups block people against police torture, and CBL address police torture, characterize beliefs sought as reparations, link police violence along legacies of racial violence, mark at long legacies of racial violence, conditionalities, voting issue, constitution, EC time, Stratsky rejects fairness, clash, race, argument, responsibility, discipline kicking. It affirms the theory, solves their offense. The poll house evidence is not responsive. The 1EC is not called for respectable deliberation. Voting after reverse causally solves by deconstructing notions of respectable versus undignified prison labor. Simple refusal fails. Political uprisings are infinite. Failure to orient towards a particular one causes co-option and entrenches conservatism, especially given the uniqueness claims established by the Kim Perm below will solve. Deplatforming fails. It's ad hoc, not internalized, and relies on toxic heuristics of adjudication and presumption of intention. Private actor fiat, it's voting issues, not a reciprocal. There's an infinite number of potential private actors. It's not real or zeros. The potential educational benefits of debate. Now, the Kim cards. Kim is app. It's not uniqueness, but plan solves. Prisons are terrible sites of debility. The food given to prisoners sucks. They have no access to personal care items without money for solitary, and are forced into forced solitary confinement, which obviously causes mental effects. The plan is the only way to resolve organized abandonment by forcing recognition of prisoner demands. The author has no method of grappling with said violence, which was cross-acts. Do I need this card?
No.
Okay. The rest of the links, the Williams card, markets critique, no link. The app immediately ends compelled labor. That deconstructed structures of market, the structure of markets which forces constant productivity is certainly in line with the alternative, but even if the app materially reinforces work in form of deconstructing neoliberal labor regime, one, it ruptures the current neoliberal ideology which pathologizes workers' labor as not disturbing rights, which breaks the social induction of the white free worker. That's what it sees as. Two, incarcerated labor now provides, quote, a weapon to be wielded against free labor, which shields organized because of the threat of corporations undercutting unionization efforts and using prison populations. That's when it sees stats. Three, forced labor now is compelled by carceral logics and the fear of imprisonment absent continuous work, which the app and perm construct. Also, when he sees that's for no unions. K. This was on case that the status quo descripted. The link turn outweighs the link 19 prison labor form of cipher. The super exploitation particularly accused to economic subordination and inmates work under unusually intense conditions for unusually low wages, extreme social illusions established by criminal status incarceration, prison wall, illegal fiction manipulated by who will to define who shall have rights and who will not, embedded within broader neoliberal regime labor domination based on the creation of permanent state of insecurity, permanent threat, unemployment threat of job loss to the super exploited services against demands by workers. Prison unions have a long history of anti-capitalist organizing and can enable it. That's when we see House and Rashid and Sindberg evidence. Permutation to vote. Support prisoner organizing the interim while pursuing the alternative broadly. Double bind the alternative overcomes the status quo. Where there's no hope of solving. The plan to give prisoners collective power to challenge carcerality through both rights and legal power wielding, which molds solidarity along the labor frame, which would reconstruct or organize labor to confront the demands of disabled folks, which is the canon, Iwalk, and House Rashid evidence. The Rosenthal link. It's largely answered above. Eugenics is obviously the status quo. The aim of disability rights and labor ought to be understood as mutually beneficial. Back sentence to 16 for two pragmatic reasons. Disability rights advocates better serve interests of movement by advocating employment law protections. One, labor markets, personal assistance services are a tricky tool for independence, but depending on having a stable labor force as a result of labor churning, many disabled individuals unable to find no services, frequent turnover placement, at risk of reinstitutionalization, wage protection, unionization, serve interest by stemming turnover. Advocates should favor worker protections to serve their own interests, political landscape, these days, particularly challenges, rights movement to really comfortable, harsh budget politics, live in an era of austerity. Advocacy allies unions can be important when disability advocates defend the right of workers, cements alliance to expand those programs are answered to limited resources, not labor to fight over smaller private and engage political activism. Only way to engage in successful advocacy is for people with disabilities, labor right to move together. Disabled folks have made strides in the political arena. Jenks and 18 social deconstruction of potentially harms disability politics. Adapting disability organizations have impacted positive change in the broader disability community. Shift towards new understanding of disability. Disabled people affect large scale change in 1960s and 70s. Saw the rise of independent living movement as disability right activists insist on an act which protected the civil rights and emancipatory politics. Shift understanding from a phenomenon to condition which disabled people. The history of disabled. Don't need that part. The alternative, it fails absent the Act 1. Immediacy DA prisoners are suffering now. The all takes forever. Bar count 23. Abolitionist reform will take decades and not generations. Conservation obeying the plan. Even if they would occur immediately, it's not clear where voters would support societal change, social change. Even overhauling capitalist economy backlash, not the only risk. Greater risk. Abolition will needlessly oppose political reforms that benefit currently incarcerated people for a future that will never materialize. 2. Re-entry DA. Even if the alternative can solve prisons, it cannot solve the structural conditions of precarity enforced by neoliberalism that ensures prisoners get stuck in cycles of poverty after the incarceration and face social stigma. 3. Fill-in DA. Lee in 25. Abolition may accelerate current trends towards predictive policing, surveillance, preventive detention, more punitive formal punishment, produce new population for homeless shelters, treatment facilities. Abolition anticipate these words, but the state already has a disposal other than prison staff. And it's not probable that eliminating prisons would prompt our state to resort to other methods. Do you want? Sure. 4. Diffusion DA. Cranium Anthony. Nah.
I would rather.
Yeah, I think I'll read. Is there that card above?
Yeah.
Okay. Carcerality DA to their theorization of disability as per Savanzanos, Gorman and 16, a framing of disability as master-trope of human disqualification marks eugenics foundational from which liberal rights claims might be launched. This to elevate a white defined a disability subjectivity prone ally for the reproduction of class race, exploitation of positive embodied difference drives inequality, not the violence of global labor relations through disability's foundational principles subsume race under the category of disability project abletionism through which stable identities have been bolstered through disabled people of color. Disabled people of color.
What's the author of that card?
Gorman, 16.
Alright, you?
Yeah.
Cool. Framework. Talking about Clash. Why is it good?
Clash.
Yeah.
We learn about things.
We learn about things.
We can produce, we get education, we can carry over to the real world.
We get education we can carry over to the real world. What is the internal link between the reading of the plan and actualizing, mass prison abolition movements?
Well, one, we haven't said that the plan would result in mass abolitionist movements, but two, we think the plan materially informs people of the benefits of rights and how prisoners are currently exploited.
It informs people about the material conditions of
Prisoners and how they're exploited.
Now, I want to get ahead of this. Does
Yeah.
debate shape our subjectivities?
We're saying, you've said it does, we've said if that is true, Clash is necessary.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, you did. I think your
we
poll
didn't
house
about
was pretty explicit about that.
subjectivity and the epistemic position.
I think poll house is quite
Does it,
explicit
is my
about that.
question.
Huh?
Does it? And if it doesn't,
think
is
if-
there any benefit to Clash?
We think Clash is key if it does.
Okay, so it is a even if claim. It is not offense on its own.
Well,
Yeah, both are true. I think Clash is also
Okay,
offensive
what is it
in
on
of
its own?
subjectivity shift because I'm sorry.
Yeah, without subjectivity shift, what's the benefit of Clash?
We think it's intrinsically desirable. There's
I
a
mean,
benefit
yeah.
to.
You can't just say it's intrinsic. Give me the why.
It undergirds the process of debate. Like it's
Okay.
clashing against.
Clash
one
is
another.
good because it's key to debate. Debate is good because of this clash. Let's get out of this circle. Why is Clash good externally?
even if debate does not fundamentally shape who we are as people, learning about things is still
I'm with you
good.
on the even if. Okay, so just like learning about things good.
Yeah, I do think that's a fair claim to make, even if debate doesn't fundamentally shape who we are. Especially learning about prisoners and
Does
their
what we
conditions
learn
is
about
good.
matter?
To a certain extent.
To a
I
certain
don't think we
extent.
posited it like authoritatively. We just said for certain learning about prisoners is good.
Now exportability. What's the internal link to exportability? I want to go back to that.
Exportability.
Yeah, you have said one of
I
the
mean,
reasons
like-
Clash can be good is because we learned that.
Like we learn about we learn about topics of the
I'm with you that we learn about things.
Yeah.
I want to know how do we do things with those things.
Why is that?
It's up to the individual
Honestly,
person.
okay,
Yeah.
it's up to the
Yeah,
individual.
that's
That's
not
fine.
why we haven't said like we must
Prefiguration.
instrumentalize knowledge.
What's prefiguration?
The Wanisi Capobianco evidence says it's a form of radical imagination because the prison is not just a material institution but an
Why are
ideological
radical
one.
imaginations good?
To disrupt the prison as a ideological institution which constrains our political
If
rights.
we win that your imagination doesn't really disrupt prisons, do we win the debate?
No.
Why?
You have to win the plan's a bad idea.
Yeah, obviously.
Not that it's not that.
Okay, so radical imaginations is just like an ancillary benefit to
It's
the
not ancillary. It's a reason our
Yeah, that ancillary is no. That's wild.
it's the
No,
reason
it's
we're
not
good under
ancillary.
your framework.
Okay, it's an even if as well. Do you have anything? Oh yeah, reasons to reject was just private actor and conduct.
The only reason to reject is conduct.
Oh, okay.
The others
Private
are
actor is an argument.
Yeah.
10. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
critique. I will start with, I had the answer to Full House as the first thing that I'm going to do. Does anyone remember the shortcut for the send document for this like loaf verbatim or whatever?
Control Shift S. That could be totally wrong. I don't use it, but I downloaded it.
Ooh, that was right.
Okay.
Yes. Okay.
Why would you tell me?
You tell me.
I said mine in the mistakes.
Okay, let's make sure it works.
Like look for games.
That's because it like closes the document.
Yeah.
Okay. Bad news, folks. It did not work. I guess I'll restart. Okay. 65. Stop prep 626. Okay. Set. Yeah, so it's the K but not framework.
Gotcha. Okay. You said the first argument you're answering is
You answered both. Yeah, where the Full House was answered.
so you're starting with Full House or?
I will start with an overview, and then the first argument on the line by line answer is the answer to Full House. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Let me open it up.
That's all I have.
Yeah.
Sorry, give me one second. I'm just configuring these nodes. All right, you get it. You're good.
Or is there a dot?
Yeah.
Oh. I'm good.
Infrastructural violence makes eugenics the necessary backdrop of our political deliberation by catching life between productive ideologies and the disavowal of dependency as demands of colonial racial capitalism. At the end of this debate, the question you should ask is who becomes the living infrastructure for USC's fantasy of independence? From the first moments of the 1EC to 1EC cross-text to the 2EC overview, USC is insistent. The status quo says incarcerated workers aren't workers. That makes them disposable, but the resolution to disposability is to be considered a worker. We have presented evidence that being considered a worker is the engine of disposability in the first place. Winnancy Kim, who says that the rights-based appeal to reform markets their full productivity ingredients ableism throughout the 1EC in two ways. One, debilitation, positing labor as redemptive, relies on eugenics to enforce mass complacency with the wage. Those who fail to meet production standards of the so-called average worker are pushed into informal economies, incarcerated in asylums and prisons, and subject to sterilization. That's Winnancy Rosenthal. This is at the heart of their solvency war, and prisoners can work themselves out of incarceration insofar as they perform enough labor. Two, capacitation. The affirmative grants disabled people the right to work themselves to death. Rights disavow dependency by heroicizing individual resilient subjects who can pull themselves out by the bootstraps to sell their labor on markets within or outside of prisons, which is why labor reforms disavowed underside is the intensified exploitation of undocumented workers paid under the table, the creation of exploitative workfare programs, and the carving out of exemptions to minimum wage laws for disabled people. The demand for productivity can only valorize life insofar as it can engage in a reciprocal exchange in a competitive marketplace, which gets mirrored in debate through the demand to produce political solutions that are legible to eugenic policymakers and not idealized, and ultimately rescue the market itself from its own contradictions. Theory of power also zero solvency because the 1EC has contrasted mass employment and mass incarceration, but we are winning that those are the same thing, which is a quote I just read from the 1AC NELP piece of evidence. Now, the first piece of argument on the flow is actually, I'm sorry, I'm gonna pull the card up to the top. It was like 2AC 13, and it was the Gorman piece of evidence. I think that this is the only thing they have that they believe is responsive to our theory of power. So I'll be exceptionally clear from the top. The thing that we are critiquing is not, is in fact, okay, look, this card says the learning disability, like, is a critique of disability as identity, which is why it critiques the learning disability category is created by white middle class parents in an effort to differentiate their children from minority children. This links to their Jenks evidence later in the 2AC about yes progress despite exclusion, which is from an article titled, quote, the disabled identity, and refers to, quote, the disability rights movements in liberal welfare states, which is what they think we should use when they're like, we should use the law and everybody can be included. This piece of evidence says rights are bad, and so is work. It is so bad for them. 2AC Gorman 16, quote, it is a good time to revisit questions of disability rights, the practice to recruit workers in a context where white supremacy continues to sustain historical operationalization in a mission of care, which is exactly what the plan does. It operationalizes white supremacy as in and through work as a mission of care for prisoners by enabling them the status of workers, which their piece of evidence says is bad. Now, the second, okay, now I'll answer the Poll House piece of evidence. The respectable versus unrespectable distinction is absolutely not what we were critiquing. It was answered in the overview. The second piece of evidence, 2AC2 is deplatforming is toxic. No, a certain piece of evidence gets out of this because it's a critique of cancel culture, and it says that intentions are relevant, but this will be pretty much like deliberated out in the 1 hour. The third argument is private actor fiat is a voter. This links to the affirmative because they have said that we should private actor fiat that Trump does not overturn the plan, that all court justices make rulings in alignment with it, that despite having no grounding in the plan text, only evidence, which means that this is not reciprocal and it's a reason to reject them, not us. The fourth argument on the flow is prisons are sites of debility, and the plan solves by, quote, recognizing prisoner demands. I will do the economies of zeal link here. The 1AC is a nationalist appeal to look at how much prison workers are essential to the economy. That is an observation that the critique has made too, but the alpha has come to a different conclusion. Labor is exploitative insofar as it is not exchanged for wages and recognized for its importance. This is why the affirmative is grounded in a piece of evidence that say that things like unionization are a, quote, crucial tool for, quote, economic mobility and, quote, preparing the American workforce. When I see NELP inserted that I have just quoted above, this is our infrastructure impact because they want to make prisoners into good American workers who can participate in the economy. There's an external impact of economies of zeal. By suturing recognition of individual workers to the American economy, they reproduce a nationalist enthusiasm for labor. The idea that work will love you back. It means that people will buy clothing made from prison unions and call it liberation. Trump will say things like buy American because even prisoners will make clothes for us. This is how companies justify investments in prison labor, and the F gives a cover to sanitize this. They want to give prisoners choices about their programming and work, not to abolish labor as a condition. 1AC Richter 24 says, quote, work can be degrading, replacing made in Honduras tags incarcerated workers to serve their particular programming needs. That is why their evidence is like, this piece of evidence is literally saying is degrading to replace made in Honduras was made in America because the thing was not made in America. This is the illusion of consent that markets are given, and this is exactly the process of debilitation that they paper over but require to achieve solvency. The fifth argument is that we have made a markets K, and the app ends compelled labor. This is our argument. All labor is compelled because it is exchanged for wages. If you are unable to do so, then you starve to death, which is why markets create structural debilitation, which is our argument. They say it's compelled, but the implication of this is that they solve the way that work is compelled. Wrong, because we are winning a theory of power that outframes this. Compelled by fear of prison is not a link turn either, because they just make prisons less fearsome by saying you can work when you're there as well. The union's critique is not an argument we're making. It's a critique of the 1AC scholarship. Now the sixth piece argument on the flow is a link turn outweighs the link. This is the Gorman piece of evidence. It was done above. The permutation begs the question of the links. The permutation begs the question of the links, so I will do the productivism link here. The NEC creates a world centered around the unquestioned value of production, which sacrifices disability that's deemed to occupy a site of counter-profitability for the inability to labor. That is why the app is like incarceration is bad, because it will make people too psychologically disabled such that they're unable to acknowledge crime is wrong and then continue on that basis to perform crime. When you see Capubianco 25, recognition of crime is precluded by antisocial and psychological derangement, disturbances, intensively finding words to reproduce deviant antisocial behavior. This proves criminality is linked with disability, which means our theory of power turns case because it makes prison necessary to contain that disability. So the F never outweigh the K because prison is at once the cause and effect of debility. The language of antisocial behaviors is furthermore a right-wing dog whistle used to describe things like gangs, drug use, etc. as disqualifying for civil life, which means that disabled people are framed as antisocial along lines that are also anti-black, which is also defense to the Gorman thing that I did above. They say that the F solves this because the app is key to foster a reintegrative identity. When I see Richter 24 says, quote, unions secure dignity, criminal punishment degrades, unions create meaningful work and reintegrative identities, which is their internal link to solvency that says, quote, prisons foster antisocial identities. Instead, people must forge identities along coalitions of shared experience. But this shared experience that they forge coalitions along the lines of is the capacity for production, which we've identified as the engine of debilitation. So this can never be a warrant for the permutation or a reason why the affirmative is good. Now, the permutation debate proper. The first is that links are not disabled people are excluded, but that violent inclusion happens by making a productive capacity the infrastructure of politics. Second is that links are decided that are done above. Third is a cost-benefit decide. The form of the permutation it requires you adopt cost-benefit analysis as a decision-making framework, which is uniquely eugenic in the context of disability. 21 cost-benefit analysis here. Since a concession to cost will be a valid reason to say, oh, no, we don't want the decision framework. We have the saying and how easy to craft austerity cost narratives are very well from our mothers are a prominent example. For the obvious question, ask the tragic question of disability context, casting some needs of cost as these people show their worth rather than how they ended up on the side of the ledger to begin with. Fifth, I think, is a rights decide. The content of the perm removes components for the alt by reducing it to language disability rights, which is there. 2 is pieces of evidence above and removes the necessary vocabulary to articulate how capital structurally guarantees debilitation. Phase 22 is rights and liberal capitalist values which fall short of remedying oppression. They focus on the struggle of disabled persons, the right to labor rather than the right to labor. We should shape resistance based on understanding that disability is a social created category derived from labor relation to capitalist economy because causes disposable persons' rights legislation, individualistic base removes coherence from political practice, even those militant organizations take for granted economic reasons, imagining world of most marginalized get a chance to compete with those dominant bodies for wage jobs that immiserate most, which is supercharged by their link turn about how we create super woke new coalitions, but the basis of them again is production capacity. Now the permanent double blind is wrong because its warrant is that the app could mold solidarity along the labor frame and on the basis of work. The 10th argument is that eugenics is a status quo. This is Beck's test card is by and large answered above, including through the productivism link, but the logic that something is a status quo and therefore should not matter is precisely how that infrastructure of debilitation is carried forward in the future, which will be a dissad to their framework interpretation. The 11th argument is disabled people can make political progress through the law. This is done above. Go to the case page. Sorry. Didn't get that out for the okay. I will extend the piece of evidence. Persons are not the neat arm of governance that they want them to be. This link turns the arguments about law is good and we are the demands of prisoners because attempts to tinker with the rules will not produce the best of all possible prisons. They will simply reinforce the legitimacy of the white sexual racial animus that divides incarceration, which is a dissad to their framework interpretation and a reason why the affirmative is bad. He also frames the circumvention debate because that is a theory of power that takes Kemp is a framing device for case stops to take out the internal link between their legalism offense and the impacts they purport to solve. This says that the app has misunderstood the way that progress, etc. works. Which means that they can never solve any of their impacts. I will also extend really briefly that the app is actually not the demands of the app is not the demands of incarcerated workers. It has papered over those demands, which is precisely what R1 and C evidence predicted they would do in order to say that it is, in order to misrepresent itself as such and continue incarceration.
We have 6:45.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, sure. One hour has been sent.
Oh, we have process.
Oh,
You're good.
I'm so ready though.
Yeah. Are you all good?
Wait, if I could find my timer.
Yeah.
Great, I just had it over there.
You all good?
Yeah.
Okay. First question I have is just a clarification question about the productivism link. Can you just explain the pieces of the link? To me, the two links seem very coterminous.
I think that the thesis claim, the 1AC creates a world around the unquestioned value of productivity and sees prisons as rehabilitative.
Okay. I guess that gets to my central question, which is why is that not the status quo? Right now, prisoners are forced to work. If they say no, they're thrown into solitary confinement. So that labor is by definition compelled.
So the thing that your question is presuming is that this is a material link with a counterplan like alt that resolves the link, which is why you're relying on the status quo framing. It is a unique link because the 1AC has posited a piece of research that links to itself by saying, oh, it's really bad when people are, made to be rehabilitated, and then made other arguments about why rehabilitation is a solution to that.
I don't understand what any of that meant.
You're like, where is link uniqueness coming from?
And I'm like, link
I'm not
uniqueness is
asking
coming
about, like-
from the presentation of the 1AC because the link is
I'm
the
not asking
1AC's
about
research.
I'm not asking about link uniqueness. I'm
Oh.
asking about link term. Status quo is compelled labor. That is the logic of the market. Plan means they don't have to work if they don't want to.
I disagree that that is the case because we have read, because the warrant for why you believe that to be true is it creates coalitions based on a shared identity
I
of
see.
laborers
Okay.
or union
Okay.
members,
That makes
right?
sense.
That might be one warrant.
The Kim stuff in the overview, infrastructural systems create eugenics. Which institutions and which infrastructure create eugenics or reinforce the logic of the market?
Is like ableism as an infrastructure.
Is enforced through which institutions?
Like institution, so like when you're saying institutions, I think you're looking for me to like give specific like
Yeah, that's what I am, yeah.
institutions. But I think we're making an argument about how this shapes things like the research of the 1AC.
Okay, I guess that gets to the alt. Did you like properly extend it or is
No.
that the, okay. But just broadly, would it look towards deconstructing these institutions or creating
We
new
answered
ones?
like we went like I understand that you really want this to be a counterplan because it's bad for you if it's not, but it's not a counterplan.
No.
So critique of the 1AC's research and a refusal alt that says that refusal of that research
Okay,
is a prioritization generation of alternatives over it.
Right now, if prisoners are imprisoned after their imprisonment ends, they can't get a job because they have a record. What is the alt, or what is your understanding of that?
Okay, so the AF doesn't abolish.
I don't care about what that. I'm asking about what the critique's understanding of that is, that
Okay.
phenomenon.
Well, that question presumes still that like, wait, how is that like?
No, it is relevant. You've critiqued the 1AC's focus on the economy as the basis for workers and
No, we've
identity.
critiqued. No, that's not true. We've critiqued
Okay,
productivism as a basis, which is why the 1AC
Sure,
son of
so-
evidence is like this is also a question for Marxism. So being like we abolish all markets is actually not a resolution to our thing, and you don't abolish all markets. And furthermore, the app does not like get rid of the legal structures that are like, or even the personal biases that lead people to be like, I won't hire somebody with a criminal record.
That's what I was asking. Okay.
Sending now. Alright, that's it. Order is A. Specifically that link.
Just framework and alt. Alt starts with.
I had all the 2AC12, but I flipped for it. So what number is it?
Oh, that's actually fine.
I would have switched something, but I used a lot of stuff.
Okay. It's okay. Okay. I'm all good for you. I'm done with that. Yeah, sure.
I'm good.
Framing issue. Debate isn't a site of instrumental policy making, but a site of rhetorical exchange. Therefore, our counter-interpretation. Evaluate the one you see as a research object and vote negative if we want to link to their imaginary or the epistemic orientations that sustain it. The net benefit is the reorientation of their dependency. Their interpretation is built on the infrastructure of unquestioned productivity. One in C's Avistana says this interdependence is inevitable. The fantasy of perfect rejoinder as exchange requires the disavowal of interdependence. The model presumes you're a flow machine, not a human, by making you the infrastructure of this debate. You can never write fast enough to catch every word we say, but they want you to. That proves your relationship to capacity comes prior to your ability to adjudicate this round, so our impact sequence fairness. You should evaluate this debate as someone with a body. Don't discount your investments in politics, your body, your life in this room to participate in a fantasy of fairness that requires we eliminate our differences and capacitate ourselves towards productivity. And no middle ground. You won't decide the AF gets the AF, the neg gets the kids. Arbitrary interventions and de facto grants them their model since it looks like an AF bound on an extinction waste every time, which proves our argument about how violent infrastructure is a never relies sacrifice of some for others. Their integral relies on predictable limits as the internal linkable fairness and clash. I'll do defense here. First, after choice solved. Infinite prep means links are unforced errors that flips internal links. Only they could have chosen what scholarship was to read in the YC. Otherwise, unmistakable offense proven by their choice to strike through unhighlighted, underlined words in the 1 and C proves scholarship matters to the people in this room, and they think that too. 2, resolution guarantees the K. Fiat comes from shows, and the resolution means our KFIAT is coordinate ground akin to state's campaign. 3, lit checks. Avistano says epistemic interrogation disabilities and several from questions later, so there are interim arbitrary limits out core topic arguments. 4, proximity filters. 2 and C link debate made a substantive critique of the grounding premise of their alpha with deep engagement across the evidence. Proof we're not unpredictable or arbitrary. Think about this like a reasonability argument. Even if another team in another debate could use our intro to read 100 word picks, that's a problem for that judge in that debate, not for y'all in this one. Now, their interp, we have 4 DAs. First is a resiliency DA. The 2AC says that rejoining the F is good because it will give them the skills to refine their argumentation. We have impact turns out because it makes them better at rhetorically outflanking dissent. There's an external overcoming impact. They've said we should simply get over the ableist premises of the F and use our speech to convince them disabled people matter. That sequence is clash because even if we could overcome the eugenic violence of the F, it is not true of all disabled people who couldn't and are not here to render that criticism. Second is an intellectual contract DA. Their model of insistence on an equal playing field of discourse relies on an intellectual contract built from disqualification to exploitation of disabled voices. Berthold Raffard 24. And intellectual contract tends to perceive human as white, masculine, able, blind. The intellectual contract stereotypes racial body denying their agency as knowledge seekers. It stereotypes disabled people incapable of exercising epistemic agency. Particular students are denied identities as knowledge producers, and their assumption disabled students are unable to function normally due to deficits. The creation of North American universities is tied to land appropriation, eugenic, and exploitation of disabled individuals. Coloniality excludes knowledge, and some people deviate from the white male bodies. Intellectual contract racializes disabled people and disables racialized people. Criteria to that disqualifies people from the status of human being. Universities were built upon this contract, which explains why these institutions devalue people with disabilities as well as racial slug. And third is a denied relationality DA. The demand to evaluate our knowledge through the utility provides a hypothetical future, writes out forms that disable knowledge that exceed and precede the theoretical registers of fiat. That's down as in Marshani 24. Disability code practice a shared relationship to proof where you learn by doing. Someone who knows what shows you then demonstrates. It has a relationship with evidence. You're not going to believe me if I tell you, so I have to show you. Engagement in study, often thought as immaterial, is more literal. Finally, cross-by angle from case. It's a DA to fiat. Remember, the way a demand is advocated for is just as important as the gain achieved. The afterfurl to fiat is what Engler critiques as counter-revolutionary, taking revolutionary demands and hauling them into tools of repression, which then go on to make future goals less achievable. Every time they say, but these demands are the demands that prisoners, remember, this isn't the link, it's the link turn. It's how a few voices become cherry-picked to justify the silencing of others. Impact turns all of the clash often say only have a chance of going for it in this debate because it is indicative of the types of discussions they produce. Also, their only answer was the Rodriguez evidence that is certainly a negative card insofar as 2 warrants. 1, Rodriguez says abolition-like demands aren't enough. It has to be abolition, which is then because they quickly disavow, no, we aren't all the demands as a prisoners. Fuck those. We're just this one demand that we actually like. Second, it proves that fiat can never operationalize the affirmative because it traps us within counter-revolutionary positions. Now, I didn't catch adult paternalist T, but in case they made one, first, directionality, both T and K are reasons this discussion would happen in the same direction. 2, no double paternity. The question was the app should have been introduced from about how we impacts. Now, 2 impacts. First was clash. I'll answer it here. First, DA the link filter. They on point claim that clash over the plan's imitation be good. 2, never maximize justifies morally reprehensible positions like eugenics good. Your gut reaction that that's not worth debating is the DA design trick. 3, no skills. That was resiliency DA. 4, debate can't shape subjectivity is irrelevant. All something is breaking down changing minds. 5, cross-sex was rough. Learning to do good things is not independent offense because learning about things is not unique to their model. No defense to like, it's about iterative testing, it's about topic research, it's about specific rigor and depth of our conversations. Means don't fill that in for them. They just say learning about shit good. Not an impact. Anything else means no new 1 ARL on this, and they can't go for the even if claim either insofar as we win a DA. Now, fairness. First, arguments require a claim, award, and an impact. Choice you had a claim insofar as the word fairness, but it is missing 2. No new 1 explanations is not an argument in this debate. Don't intervene. 2, sequencing. Existence in debate is a prerequisite to fairness, but the links to DA prove they sacrifice disabled people to actualize their models. 3, paradox is wrong. Drinking water is universal precondition for debating. That doesn't entail maximize. 4, it's less fair to turn a 9-second YC into a 9-second plan text. 5, ballot can't solve fairness. It's a productive infrastructure refuse it. Now, one of the arguments not a pick prefigurative rule-making. Either A, there's not a net benefit to the app because the unreciprocal offense turns fairness to clash proof cross-links when they say it's not a sufficient negative link condition, prove they're imaginary bad, or B, when your risk of link should be sufficient, prove they've not imagined their way out of prison, so vote negative. Also answers the ethics or repair argument because it proves they aren't that. Not condo, we were always unconditional, you didn't ask. Remember, interdependence in Neville means the question of how it's organized. Meaning your ballot is a choice. Either deny the interdependence that weaves us all and stay complicit with the violence infrastructures bracket our discussion and orient us instead toward the excess life at the seams of work. That which isn't give and take, but instead is give and give and take and take. It's a reorganization dependency that refuses the act. They had 3 DAs. I'll link turn to each. First, immediacies. Their mechanism to resolve this is fiat, which I impact turned above. 2, re-entry. The mechanism to solve this is forcing people to learn how to work it out was implicated out on the link debate. Every time they are quick to clarify and cross-examine, whoa, we are not total abolition. Prove they can never solve free entry by something signal. Finally, the fill NDA. One AC said the plan is aligned with prison union tactics toward abolition. Prove they link super hard to counter-revolutionary arguments because they deny specific demands of these unions. It means they, also cause more carceral outcomes. It's case term.
We have 610. Starting now.
There's one re-highlighting. Just lay it out. Do you have that?
Yeah.
Do you have that?
No.
Okay, just this one card.
Wait, sorry, 2. You're doing this, right? Okay. 155 or something. 58.
Sorry, I'm just pasting it in the doc instead of sending it in the body.
Wait, so it's 3, 2 on doubles, and 3 this thing.
2 doubles, and then I guess the last day is like 4 technically, right? Isn't it? Because it's positive?
Yes.
Or is it not?
Okay. Just trying to figure out why it's 3 days.
I really like the 3 debates a day though. It just feels more
Manageable.
I agree.
I'm with you. I do kind of wish, like, maybe hot take, they started a little later and was more smushed together.
Yeah, I agree. I would take that.
You think there's too much downtime?
There is a lot.
And, like, I would appreciate going to bed earlier and waking up later. Like,
Yeah, totally fair.
than, like, you know, an extra hour of prep.
Okay. Everyone good for an order? Yeah, good work.
Yes.
It'll be case, then the critique. For the critique, I'll start with framework, so the 1 in R, and then alt. Honestly, yeah, critique will be 1 in R, then 2 in C.
Cool. I did not get a card yet.
Anyone else got it?
Wait, did I? It's Zavistanos we highlight. Okay, I just got it. Yep.
Okay. Sorry, there's like something in the back of my throat. Okay.
Extending 2 arguments on the critique will lose Iowa this debate. The case functionally case take out with no external impact, but they've definitely conceded the ability for collective bargaining rights to challenge forced labor from prisons. The plan enables unions, which gives prisoners autonomy to choose which labor to do, and creates prison labor union linkages, which allows them to challenge conditions within the prison while also reshaping society outside the prison. That's Richter, Behan, and Mayock, NELP, and Southall. Kemp is wrong as far as generic doesn't assume CBR prisoners are prisons themselves are rules-based institutions in terms of being guided by profitability now, which the plan deconstructs as per every 1AC internal link, specifically dropped 1AC canon that says labor rights empirically are able to challenge prison, proven by Attica uprising and California hunger strikes, and the unique positioning of strikes within the prison context. But when that they link to this worse via the Gorman extension on the critique as a net benefit to the permutation, framing the circumvention is relevant if you don't have circumvention arguments. The critique. Framework. The ask it to weigh case and should not have to rejoin non-competitive alternatives. It's a permutation of interms that solves their offense. They get their links, but must prove to the perm and not the plan alone. First, cross-reality, it turns their offense and outweighs their interm. Assumes and creates and instantiates an artificial separation between form and content, which is the logic of carceral individualism, i.e. the assumption that you can separate the research of the plan from its actual implementation. Second, fairness, plan exclusion, and world peace alternatives moot. Afghan, Dex, fairness, and clash, which turns their offense, and they know which turns their offense in outweighs they want to win, controls the largest internal link to your ballot, and emphasizing equity is challenging the proximate harm of able normative violence. Their alternative is akin to denying water. Yes, and clash turns their offense, but it requires competitive equity and predictability for multi-level testing turns their offense because effective engagement is a prerequisite to ethical subject for formation to our round social activities. Assuming they do is guilt assuasion. Only a process of clash throughout the course of a season can solve. Now, the bottom half of the one assumes a model of a model that we have not forwarded. Their critiques of fairness are wrong because it assumes a trade-off between our interp and theirs, which is entirely incorrect. The second half of it is just the fiat K1 neoliberalism turn. Inherently teaching debaters that the state is bad. We know the plan won't happen, but it's good because it should not would. Otherwise, status quo conservatism goes unchallenged. 2, prefigured politics. Utopic carceral imagination is the key to tackle counter-hegemonies that challenge carceral reality. Adequate proves rhetorical intervention in this matter turns our offense on a non-material level. That's Capo Bianco. This last argument about cherry picking violence, it's wrong and links exclusively to them because only we're the ones listing prisoner demands and saying that they do want these rights. They haven't even identified any prisoners that would say that they do not want the plan. Now, the alternative DAs or impact turns to the link. First, carcerality DA. Gorman, extending Gorman here. Theorizing disability as the foundation of U.S. infrastructure as per their Kim evidence is an attempt to elevate the white disabled subject to the master status while subsuming race as an analytic that worsens carcerality, turns the project into one of able nationalism that violently expunges disabled people of color by shirking questions of settlement and enslavement and carcerality, which worsens productivity. Gorman is not simply a critique of disabled identity. They dropped every other part of the card. Jenks does not link nothing about the part we read forward disability as identity. Second, reentry and fill in DA. Group them. It's an impact turn to the economies of ZeaLink. Economic considerations are important because we are situated within the economy. Rights are key. Only union linkages can facilitate a life beyond precarity. It proves the necessity of going beyond refusal. Otherwise, carcerality becomes entrenched under new form and causes things like worse carcerality within mental health institutions, homeless shelters, etc., which turns their offense because it reifies the productivity logics under a new guise. Now, permutation do both. Sorry, permutation do both. Collective bargaining rights for prisoners refuses both the imbalance of power that forces ability onto prisoners and also the symbolic order sustained by that division of free, dignified labor and undignified labor. That's sad. Stubblebind was barely answered in the block. Their only answer was question begging of the links, but the inclusion of the alt resolves them. The alt reimagines all society shift away from neoliberal ideals to one of codependency, which certainly overcomes their objections with the plan. The plan is the exact type of refusal Zabatanus calls for. Absent it, the alt fails, and instead of refusing infrastructural violence, recreates it by refusing to acknowledge prison labor and our common dependency to their work. Insert USC in blue. The Tweezy had multiple reasons why the plan deconstructs the work regime in form, which will all drop by the block. Most important is the argument of coerced labor. Prisoners are forced to work now even if they lack the ability to, which maximally produces ability capitalism. They can see the plan gives them the choice to not be thrown solitary that materially deconstructs ability on a large scale. Second is the benefits of the labor movement for disabled folks. Back center straight turns to their links. Joining the disability rights movement and labor unions allows for allyship or deconstructs precarization of labor markets, of disabled folks in the labor market. Last is the divide between dignified and undignified prison labor, giving prisoners bargaining rights, ruptures this, deconstructs symbolic divide that casts disabled folks as less than, that's above. No. Rights DA, the question begging of the link, we straight turn their overemphasization of disability via government, and the stuff I did above means we certainly solve. No cost benefit analysis. The permutation does not require the scripting that onto us. It's solely a question of mutual compatibility, but they link more every time they say the quote link outweighs or also solves case. Economies of ZeaLink is wrong. Sanitization is the status quo. Prison labor is invisibilized now, but the plan forces recognition of prisoner demands. Quote, all labor is coercive, is wrong, paternalistic, rejected, and denies a prisoner choice. They want to be able to work, to be able to get commissary gate money, etc., which are all material DAs to the alternative, and impact turns to the link. Lastly, turns case at the top is not unique. One see Cross-X clarified this. This is literally the legal presumption that says the legal presumption in the status quo that says that creates quote the worker BJO regime. The plan solves it by overturning Jones and providing workers' rights. Anything else?
No.
Oh, we had 6. I forgot what it was.
It was 6 fucking
6.
Yes, sir.
Yep. I missed that.
Yep.
Thank you. You have all that, right?
Yeah.
This entire stuff.
The order is going to be the K. It's going to be the order of the block.
That was
To
everything. Everything then framework alt.
Okay, gotcha.
Do you hear me?
Huh?
It's that joke.
Oh. Did a lot of those today for me.
Hey.
Okay. Everybody good?
Yep.
Your ballot is not a choice between a plan and a counterpoint, but the eugenic infrastructure that one sees productive risk for research and a refusal of it. Your ballot can never give prison workers the right to unionize, so you should not be fooled by the 2-hour appeals because they're all downstream of the framework that we are far ahead on. You should refuse the category of labor itself that is at the heart of productivity and worth, because productivity creates an illusion of independence that capacitates some, but that is made possible through the debilitated living infrastructure that enables the plan. The Link debate has traced the scholarly investments in productivity that cohere their justifications for the act and their interpretation of what good debating itself entails, which is dropped in the block. I'm going for the economies of Zeal Link at the top. The one he sees resolution to disposability is to be considered a worker. This is grounded in what I see cross-6 and the first words out of their mouths. This is why when I see NELP says the giving wage to employers and workers is a way of, quote, preparing the American workforce, which is why Twin cross-6 wants me so badly to answer the question, what about when you get out of prison and you can't get a job? Shouldn't it be good to get one? The one you see reorganize, just reorganizes that in order to enable more people to labor. The one you see recognizes that prisons are a site of debilitation, disablement, but these link turns they will go for are recharacterized by their one I see Capio Bianco evidence, which says that, quote, anti-social psychological derangement precludes recognizing crime as crime, which is why instead of the degrading punishment of not being paid to work in prisons, the act makes unions, which, quote, create meaningful life and, quote, foster reintegrative identities, which is Auri Bonisi Richter, which proves the act provides that corrective to disability, like psychological derangement through positing work as redemption. This is why we have one that the one creates the picture they paint by granting disabled people the right to work themselves to death and makes debilitating supply chains the disavowed underside of that politics. This link turns all of their arguments, this link turns every argument that they will make in this debate and proves that the affirmative cannot solve any of their offense. Now, that also beats the permutation because the app is not, because the binary we're identifying is not dignified, undignified. This is not the thing we've said is bad. Work can never equal dignity, but they want it to, which link turns this. Now, I'm pretty sure that they are going to go for prisoner demands and autonomy in the 2-hour. You cannot make this appeal to prisoner demands in the 2-hour because the link debate sequences and controls whether they can access that. Because markets preclude autonomy and forced labor, and the question of do it paid or do it unpaid is a false one. The link sequences, because those appeals are a sleight of hand, form a more pernicious framing of labor because we have demonstrated the infrastructure behind it, which is a prior question. We cannot conceptualize debate over whether labor should be free without the prior question, should labor be the infrastructure of the world we want to build in the first place? The app is like prisoners really want commissary money, but simultaneously uses examples in the case page like hunger strikes, which is the opposite of buying food from the commissary, or says rights are good and then cites the Attica uprising, which famously did not occur. Their rights, but extra legally. We wrote a piece of evidence on this. The one to extend the block is the fiat cherry picks demands of some prisoners. You can say, give me money to buy commissary or rights or earn $8 an hour, but never fuck the system of labor in the first place and the structure that understands value only so far. Value of individuals only so far as they can produce things. They want to say they can enable prisoners to enunciate claims like I want the tag of my clothes to say made in America and really be made in America, but never abolish the system that forces them to make that in the first place, paid or not, which link turns compelled labor because all labor is compelled and having wages and change that fact. The Gore needs of evidence, one-year extension, quote, shirks the question of enslavement. Link question mark. Our reading this card is way better than theirs. Says par is correct, which is why we're reading par via cam. It says even if you think there's a link to this, you would include the AF link source, which is why it's a K of rights and it's a K of disability as identity, which are mishandled one of your warrants that we are just far ahead on this answer. If I win a link, then you should refuse the permutation because it does not operate. It operates only through the frame of rights, which you have impact turn. That is the spade to NC piece of evidence that reifies our disability impact because disability is not based on identity but on a productivity drive, which is why saying rights good in a vacuum is not the fat thing that the app is doing. They're saying rights are good in order to weaponize those claims to justify the plan's ability to hike productivity, union membership, and American workforces. So you'll strike the permutation and put out on this allyship of disabled people is irrelevant because disability should not be considered an identity category but a structure that undergirds all things. So it's a question of relation to it, dignified, undignified, divide, done above, economies of Zeal Link, all done above. I'll do the framework. I will do I will do the framework debate here. Interpretation evaluate the one he sees a political and ideological artifact. Drop the proximity filter because your ballot cannot give rights to workers, but it can refuse to join with them to build an infrastructure that requires the sacrifice of disabled life. I am extending the resiliency to that. Their framework argument is that if we engage them in the way that they want us to, we'll give them the skills they need to implement the app and do really good things for prisoners. This is our thesis claim about infrastructure because it makes us into the infrastructure of their model in the abstract and of their skills in specific. This wears us down to build them up because even if we could prove them wrong in this debate by rating this alt like a counter plan, outperforming them to convince them that we should actually not sacrifice disabled people in order to achieve some limited rights, our impact turns to implicit demand for resiliency that they force disabled people to occupy in order to be taken seriously. The interp debate is a new one AR interp, so I think you should have rejected the logic partialism arguments flows neg. They have attempted to separate the research from the plan by attempting to do sequence research as secondary to effects, so either a link is sufficient to a negative or they have double turned themselves. Competitive incentives. A, new, strike it. B, fairness, wrong. Sequencing is done above, decides our prior question of fairness. You should not allow them new implications, but to see lacks of warrant. Ethical subject formation begs the question of the link debate, which is done above. Clash over the seasons being by conceded one or arguments. 1, link sequence desirability like clash. 2, only external benefit to clash's education. 0 to see warrants by iteration. No interperm, that was done above. Fiat is good is wrong because the conservative fill-ins on net benefit when they've conceded no internal link between debate and the actualization of the plan. You can't challenge carceral layout as we win link. Cherry picking is not linked to quote citing prisoners, but to cherry picking, which demands a prisoner's defense, which they can never demand the end of the exemption of the 13th Amendment, which is the case page, and implicitly extended above. External pieces of defense dropped. Clash never maximize it, justifies morally reprehensible position. So our critiques of their model necessarily come first. Fairness, paradox, wrong. Drinking water universal doesn't count maximize. Ultra denying water is nonsensical and is not and does not justify it. It does not justify it, but the link debate does sequence framework because it is because the link debate has fleshed out kind of what their scholarship or debates over the plan would have to bracket and what becomes the infrastructure of those debates that is always disavowed.
158. It's case, critique. Order of the critique is going to be the permutation debate. Then I'll do framework. Then the alt. Don't mind if I run the restroom really quick on it, that one.
Are we going to growl for dinner time?
I don't think that means. Yippee. Really, Gray? Really?
I haven't been in
You can go to the Golden Crown.
maybe 9 years. But did you find somewhere?
That's so straight. Alright, is everyone still good?
Oh, yo.
Oh yeah.
Vote affirmative because Iowa has gone for a critique without an external impact, dropped the case, and only the permutation create codependency by being able to deconstruct stability within the carceral system while also deconstructing ability capitalism holistically. Extending prisoners the right to bargain is necessary to solve for two immediate forms of carceral violence that the alternatives certainly cannot solve absent inclusion of the affirmative. First is prison labor hyper exploitation. Prisoners will be appropriately compensated for their work, which deconstructs dehumanization and ruptures the current social reduction of the white free worker in comparison to the expendable carcerated. That's Sachs and Armstrong. Second is debt peonage. Overturning Jones enables organizing rights for prisoners, which improves prisoners' conditions while they are behind bars, but also creates linkages with outside units to create and receive employment after incarceration. That's the one EEC and the LP evidence critique. Rendering a negative ballot is entirely impossible when the 2R drop. Their author agrees with the permutation and has said nothing about any of the 1AR DAs to the alt. So voting for Iowa in this debate is entirely a non-starter. The overview of the 2R is entirely bracketed out by framework, which will be below. The question of the permutation debate. The question you have to ask yourself at the end of this debate is: yes, infrastructural violence is bad, but what do we do about that? How do we instrumentally combat the infrastructures of violence that materialize the category of labor? Only the affirmative has provided a material strategy to deconstruct labor exploitation currently. Permutation to both. Listen to prisoner demands and give them the right to collectively bargain to refuse the to deconstruct the imbalance of power created through labor regimes within carceral institutions while also deconstructing the symbolic divide between free and unfree labor that sustains contemporary ability capitalism and eugenics. You can safely agree that the labor frame is bad and vote out because only the affirmative has a praxis to be able to do that and is not at all mutually exclusive with the alternative. The double bind is an easy way for you to resolve this debate. Even if it's not your favorite argument in the world, Iowa's completely blown it off in the 2NC and the 2NR. Inclusion of the alt resolves every impact of the link. The alt reimagines all society to shift away from neoliberal ideals to one of codependency, which certainly overcomes any impact you think the link has. And remember, they said the alternative is unconditional, so you have to stick them to it. Now, the link debate proper. The block just did not grapple with several levels of how the perm is able to deconstruct the work regime, which were in the 2EC. The most important is the argument about coerced labor, which the 2NR has nothing on. Prisoners are forced to work now, even if they lack. Prisoners are forced to work now, even if they lack the ability to, which maximally reproduces ability capitalism. They've conceded that the plan gives them the choice to not do so without being thrown into solitary confinement. That materially deconstructs the ability at a large scale, which is the 1EC South Hall evidence. The Sano's 1AR will be the top of your AF ballot. Their card, we highlighted, lays out your understanding of how the permutation functions. Their alternative bar for bar explains our link turn argument. Quote, certain kinds of work get fairly compensated and other kinds no longer counted to work. This is, quote, a disavowal of common dependency. Quote, they're the only players who can't decide to play the game. That is certainly prisoners because they are forced to work whether or not they want to do so. The economies of seal link. The Chunar is entirely posturing here, framing the 1AC as weakness and solvent requires actually debating the case. We've straight turned this link via the reentry and fill in DAs below. The plan does not position work as redemption or force disabled people to work themselves to death, but allows them to not have to do that while there are prisons because they now have a wage, so they get commissaries, sanitary products, etc. But also challenges outside that prison because now formerly incarcerated people will have money that they made while they're in prison, but also have connections to unions who can give them higher paying, non-exploitative jobs. We didn't say hunger strikes are good. We said that's what disabled people and prisoners have to do now to survive. The alternative entirely disavows this. One DC Capobianco does not frame this out. Obviously, there's social conditions and social reasons behind why prisoners are pathologized now, but when it's Zach, who's at labor rights, the most proximate source through which that pathologization occurs, even if work cannot be dignified, holistically, labor now certainly is less dignified because it removes autonomy by being compelled and is exploited because of a lack of wages. Prisoner demands should matter, but we're saying that the plan materially deconstructs the labor frame regime. The Tuisi Box Santos card also provide proofs we have further inroads to their offerings. It is an empirical card that says the disability rights movement and labor unions have been able to work together to allow and create conditions of allyship, which deconstructs the precarization of disabled folks in the market. No 2NC Spade rights argument. This is a question begging of the link debate, but it's entirely non-unique, and labor rights specifically are good. Framework. Frameworks are non-starter. The Chunar BF sounded great, but importing your Reju versus Michigan is not responsive versus our specific model, especially given a drop carcerality DA. Weigh the case against the representation and a competitive alternative. Chunar drops carcerality DA. Their termination assumes an artificial separation between the 1AC's representation and its consequences. That is the larger carcerality wherein the form of the prison is justified based on utilitarian calculus, while the content worsens violence through material subjugation. That also is a logical capitalist realism that serves to obscure the structures of capitalist power accumulation that institute notions of productivity and evil normativity. That further sees the realm of consequentialist analysis. The very conservatives that perpetuate infrastructural violence. That link turn sequencing is something exclusively done by them. We don't sequence debating impact health solves. No resiliency DA, no link. We have never said clashes are necessary to become better people, but regardless, not going for it. That because they dropped the 2 rounds can't change our mindsets. Carcerality is a procedural justification for our model that certainly outweighs our offense because the impact is the entirety of the 1AC. Now the fiat cake. Drop prefigurative politics DA. It's question begging of the link. It assumes our political magic is in tandem with those that are hegemonic now, but dropped on case. Ours is one that is critical counter hegemony that challenges carceral logics of free and unfree society. That's Capobianco. Even if they're a win framework, you should vote AF, or a link turns proof voting AF is best for refusing infrastructures of power. Our interpretation is not new. It's a response to the 2NC introducing a new framework interpretation. It's consistent with the 2AC. Now, Gorman, carcerality is carcerality DA. It also means they lose under their own framework interpretation. Yes, they link much worse. 200 said, quote, disability as a structure undergirds all things, which erases the role of colonial enslavement and carceral violence. Further, Kim says normative investments are, quote, fundamentally shaped by ableist idea. They drop the impact which causes able nationalism, which turns the productivity offense. Now, the alternative. What did the Chunar even say here? Collective dependency is impossible, materially absent the ask for their Zavatsanos cards because prisons, because carceral labor materially disavows our dependency on prisoners. Simple refusal fails. Some level of economic considerations are important because otherwise prisoners will be forced into exploitative jobs once they're out of prisons, or be able to get one back, or be able to get one entirely, which puts them back in the prison to force them to work in, which is the 1EC NELP evidence. At best, the alternative creates new cycles of carceralization, which is the 2EC Lee evidence. What did you say?
No, it's fine. You
Yeah, that's not right. Or the Gorman thing, they dropped, we don't link to Gorman because we didn't read that part of the Jenks article. Good debate.
Hey, y'all.
I want a part.